Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. My apologies for being a little bit away during the holidays. We're back full in action with regular episodes every other day. Today, my guest is director Anand and producer Zakir, who have had the pleasure of knowing for the last couple of years. But we're here to talk about their film, Salam, which came out 2019. The film is about Dr. Abdus Salam, who was the very first Muslim Nobel Peace Prize winner way back in 1979. We talked about archival footage. We talked about how much knowledge they had about Dr. Abdus Salam and the community that he belonged to, and many other things. It was a great chat. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Zakir and Anand about the feature documentary Salam. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on to talk about your film Salam. Thank you so much for doing it, first of all, and coming on and talking about it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah,
in
sure
fact,
Thank you.
I got a text yesterday. Somebody in India wrote a book, just released a book. It's a fiction novel based on Dr. Salam's life, which was kind of
Really?
yeah. Somebody sent me a
what's it
review of the book published in a newspaper. So
What's the book called?
it was called
I think it's fiction inspired by Salam's story.
fiction
Is it?
inspired by Salam's story. Wasn't the other one also like one of your friends wrote, Zakir?
Pure Land, yeah, by Zarar Saeed. His was also fiction inspired by Salam's story.
Yeah, the book is, what's the book called? It's called
Which is interesting because, like, I mean, it's the real story is interesting enough.
Yeah, it's called Everything There Is by M.G. Wasanji, inspired by the life of Pakistani nuclear physicist.
Yeah, I'm not sure why would they do two books inspired by, as opposed to, like Zakir said, just doing a based on his life, essentially, taking that kind of a route.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I met the other guy who's Zakir's friend. What's his name? Ziad? What's his name? I forget.
Zarar Saeed.
Zarar Saeed, yeah. I think he had some visions of making a feature film or something he was saying.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your film. I would love to know, and I don't think we've ever talked about this. How did this whole project started? Like, what's the journey of this entire storyline that you went out to make on Dr. Abdus Salam? Whoever wants to take.
It took 14 years to make. I'll begin because we took 14 years to make. Had it been Anand, it wouldn't have taken that long. But so Omar and I were met in college in Jan 1996. And that year we read Salam's obituary in the New York Times. And now the both of us were there to pursue degrees in science. Omar was studying biochem, I was studying physics. Despite which we knew very little about our country's only Nobel laureate. And as soon as we realized that we didn't know much about Salam, we also realized the reason why we didn't know enough about Salam was because the state hadn't told Salam's story. And it hadn't done so because Salam belonged to a sect that was persecuted in Pakistan, ostracized from mainstream Islam, and then persecuted in Pakistan. So as early as then, at some level, we thought, this is a good story to tell. We had no idea or one of us would end up becoming a filmmaker. And then I think, now there's a bit of retrospective recoloring here. One tells the story sexier than it actually transpired. So I think in a post 9/11 climate, where you sort of identified as a Muslim, you were asked to opine or speak to the Muslim condition. So Salam then resurfaced in our minds because he was someone who went to Stockholm wearing a turban, not to blow the place up, but to receive a Nobel Prize. And so it was in 2002 that we informally started researching Salam. And then 2004 in which we formally started researching Salam's life. Anand, we met in 2016. So all those years and find out. And struggling to raise money because prejudice again. And then, yeah, so 2016 is what helped in terms of raising money, discovery of the Higgs boson, because it became inevitable. Salam was mentioned everywhere in every other newspaper, right? Because their work had paved the way to make the search for the Higgs boson a meaningful thing to do. It, kind of theoretically that there was good reason to believe that the Higgs boson exists. And then Malala won the Nobel Prize, and again, newspapers had to mention who'd won it before her. That eventually resulted in us being able to raise a fair bit of money. And we asked a mutual friend to recommend someone, and she put us in touch with Anand, which was a game changer.
Anand, how much did you know about Dr. Abdus Salam, as well as the whole background story of where he comes from and his community?
Yeah, not really that much. I mean, of course, growing up in India and living in that part of the world, I had heard the name. I did my bachelor's in science, so that name was always sort of, in my sphere as far as one of the few people to have won the Nobel Prize from that world. That's about all I knew. I mean, I didn't know anything more than that. Yeah, so when I came on board, I mean, they had already had about a couple of drives full of footage. So I said, I'll have to look at what I have to actually see if I really want to do this. And when I saw the footage and I did some of my own digging, that's when I realized that, well, there's enough layers here to tell a really good, deep story. Not just like the science part of it, where it's just, some guy who's brilliant wins a Nobel Prize. I mean, what really made the film what it is all these layers that his life had, and the politics of his time. Of course, all the religious bigotry around it. I mean, there were so many angles you can come at it as. So that kind of, really this made me kind of get into the project, saying, yeah, there is something that we can tell today and which might be relevant for today, because making movies about dead people is, can't be like the greatest hits kind of movie, right? It has to be relevant for today, and why is somebody watching it today, and what are they learning that they couldn't get from, say, reading a Wikipedia page or doing their own little research online. That's where it comes down to, like, what more can you bring to the story? And when Zakir and Omar and I met, I mean, that's when I realized that, yeah, there's enough here, there's enough meat to get going. But then I told them directly that, what you've shot so far probably will not work. We'll have to come at it from a different angle and tell the human story as the primary part of the story, and the science part would take a back seat, other than being the basic informational stuff, because every film works when there's an emotional hook. And the emotional hook was his amazing life, from the village all the way to London, to his wives, to his politics, to his belief in Islam while being a particle physicist. I mean, all these things were quite deep to explore, and that's how we got started. We really didn't know. I mean, like you do documentaries too, like or any film for that matter. You really don't know where you're going with it until you get going, and then you get to where you get to, and you say, okay, I've reached an interesting point, so let me stop and not go on any further and just put it to bed. So yeah, it took me 2 years to get it from where they were at to where it eventually came to be.
Great. Zakir, you said you were in the 90s, you were studying physics, and that's when you came to know about Dr. Abdus Salam. The whole, how much did you know about the backstory of the community that he comes from, and the 1974 incidents and the 1984, I think, the certain elements of the law that were passed? Like, how much familiar were you with all that and the persecution? And
Back
then
in
same
90,
and then same question for Anand afterwards.
back virtually nothing. Virtually nothing. It was a steep learning curve in terms of absorbing all that went down. I just had a sort of vague sense of there was this community, there was declared heretical by an act of parliament in 1974. Obviously, one had Ahmadi friends in high school, but one knew very little as to what their beliefs were. Uh, One also knew that they would keep it hush hush,
Mm-hmm.
and those among us who were progressives would tell them to not reveal their identity. I remember this one friend of mine wrote Ahmadi on a piece of paper, where you had to declare what your religion was. And I remember another friend telling him, "What, are you mad? Don't do this." And then I was rather intrigued and asked him why why are you telling him to not reveal what he is? And they're like, no, 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 it's super controversial and they're persecuted. The friend went, thank you, thank you. And so, it's very superficial sense of what all was at play. Of course, by the end of it, we got to know everything extremely well. I mean, knew it inside out, knew it far better than some Ahmadis, I'll say. I don't want to sound, at the risk of sounding like Imran Khan, at the risk of sounding like someone who says, I know the West far better than Westerners know themselves. And but yeah, but initially nothing at all. And what's interesting is what Tariq Ali ends up saying in an interview, that when there were riots against the Ahmadis in the mid 50s, the Munir and Kayani Commission wrote this scathing report of what transpired, and they couldn't get any two mullahs to agree on a definition of Islam. And Tariq Ali calls it one of the most illuminating documents in Pakistan's history, and it should be mandatory in our curricula because it's extremely enlightening. But obviously, those things you realize only retrospectively, right? Once you've done a deep dive,
Yeah.
and oh my God, there's this, and this, which everyone should know about.
Right. Right. And Anand, you?
No, I was completely clueless. I mean, I grew up in India, so we are familiar with that part of the world, all the religious hatred, bigotry, all that, the politics behind it, and how the two nations got to where they are today. Um, I knew a little bit about the making of the bomb and all that history, and his name would pop up. I think I had read that. In college I did math, physics, and chemistry, but it was just sort of very general. I did my bachelor's in physics, so there would be some particle physics mentioning there, and I guess the name would pop up there, but nothing. I didn't know anything much about the Ahmadi angle at all. I mean, I know the word Qadiani was. I grew up in a city, Hyderabad, which is half Muslim, and that word would every now and then appear. But I was like, okay, maybe it's another. We had Aga Khanis, we had various sects even in Hyderabad, and Bohras. So yeah, and that name would come up, but I really didn't know beyond that what it really meant and what the history was behind how the whole sect came to be, and so that to me was a huge revelation when I dove into this film and this topic. I mean, that's the best part about making these films that we make. You learn so much, and even if you're writing like a PhD thesis, I mean, probably you would not learn as much as sometimes when you make a documentary film, because you come at it from so many different angles, and there's so many layers that you unpack.
Yeah.
And there was, and then that led me to research more like the history of the Ahmadis in India itself, in Punjab and all that, which is sort of mentioned lightly in the film.
Yeah.
And then the story of Salam coming to India to meet his teacher, that was quite like, I was blown away by that story. And there was another story which is not in the film, where he had also come to Hyderabad. Somebody told me after they watched my film that actually the city I was born in, Salam had made a visit. There was some interesting information I learned about that. So yeah, before the film, I mean, it was just a name and of a person who had reached great heights in his field. That's about it.
Yeah. In terms of one of the things I loved about the film, and having watched a lot of documentaries of people who are not around anymore, for the lack of a better word, it becomes challenging. How do you angle, especially if there's not that much available in terms of interviews, in terms of footage. One thing that to me stood out the most is normally when you show I wouldn't say any, a lot of directors or producers, when they would have, when they want to show, let's say, Istanbul from the 1950s, they'll probably show a shot in the present time of Istanbul and go on to the story, wherever the story is taking you. But you guys were able to dig in and find archival footage of each cities and each town and each villages of relatively around the same time, which really took me to that time. And I really, really appreciated that. It didn't occur to me the first time I watched it, but today when I watched it, it hit me that how important that was. How was that in terms of getting all that stuff? And I'm sure Zakir and I talk about archival footage all the time, but I would love to know more from both of you guys, the angle of getting that and the process of getting that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I should give kudos to Zakir for this. I mean, we have this amazing footage of Lahore, which actually came from India, came from actually a movie called Lahore. That's where we found that footage. And
Okay.
it's quite a endeavor to chase it down because the archives wouldn't release the footage to anybody. So we had to once we found it, I was tapping into contacts I had, and once we got to the footage, they couldn't transfer it, so we had to pay for somebody to go from Pune to Bombay to
Private to Bombay, yeah.
No, I mean that's where these films come down to, right? I mean, yeah, when you see old footage in a movie, it's not just it takes you back to that place, but it's also kind of just like when you watch an old photograph, it does trigger something.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the beginning when we had a discussion, I had said we have to make this film by not just telling Salam's story but also Pakistan's story, and interweave it with what was happening during that time in its political, the unrest and the political upheaval that the country was also going through. And so using old footage became sort of, we have to. I mean, we have clips of Jinnah, we have clips of Lahore, we have clips of other, places, even London from that time period. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it was sort of a no-brainer to go and see what we can find, and luckily we did find some amazing stuff.
Yeah. Zakir, just how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, it was a nightmare. It was an obsession. I got obsessed with archives and trying to dig stuff up. I remember Googling Salam every single day for decades. Even remember Googling Abdus Salam because I had a feeling that dyslexic loggers would have gotten that incorrectly. And we found the prison court shows up if you look up Abdus Salam. So not when you Google Abdus Salam. But if you notice, we did a cross dissolve. We moved back and forth in the
Yeah.
same cross
I love that. Yeah.
It was very hard to do because how the hell do you not just find archives, but find archives in the same time you're looking at and the same cross section of space. Some of it was premeditated, some of it was accidental. But
we had a clip
I
of
think it's looking and constantly looking and revisiting and just trying out all sorts of crazy things and searching constantly because the internet is. So searching for something once and not coming upon something doesn't mean it's not there or that someone who has it hasn't put it up. Constantly looking for things. But it was funny how Anand and I were filming in Italy, and my wife, we were getting married, and my 2B had told me to get a suit from Italy. And I remember Anand and I were like, man, let's get that bloody shot. That was a shot we used to go back in time. So screw the suit, we have to get a shot.
Yeah.
So we'd figure out what cross section to film and where to film it from, for that one cross dissolve. But yeah, I mean, we're trying to, we've also managed to do it quite well for this other film we're working on together. But not being able to find one particular appearance of this person on a show really torments me. Because you can't get obsessive and let go of stuff you can't find. The worst thing to have happened, and I think Anand and I both felt the same way. We found great photos of Salam and Bhutto together, and found some stuff in better quality only after we'd done the film.
After we had finished, yeah.
Which
That's
is
always the
kind of
case.
happened. That's always the case, but it really hits. I mean, it is, so yeah.
You mentioned Bhutto, and for people who don't know, Bhutto was a prime minister of Pakistan in the 1970s. But there was one of my favorite parts in the film is there's a photo of Bhutto sitting at a rally, and you guys push in, and then all of a sudden it stops and it starts going up, and then you see Abdus Salam speaking. I thought that was really creatively done. It's very simple movement, but it just worked so well with what was being said and the timing of it and the way it was done. I love that
Right.
moment. I absolutely love that moment.
There's footage of it. That's exactly the footage we found afterwards.
Oh,
What I
really?
also
That's awesome.
loved, and that was Anand's doing, this empty hand. The Salam is about to shake someone's hand, and then
Yeah.
move into an empty hand.
Right.
Very symbolic of he has no collaborator, he hasn't seen, no one to shake his hand.
Yeah.
That was really nice too.
So
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, even this new film that we're doing, I mean, there's no real parallel, but both are sort of tragedies. Salam's story is sort of a tragedy. I mean, it's not getting the recognition that he was seeking. I mean, he got the Nobel Prize, but the recognition he was seeking was more from his nation and from his people and all that stuff, which didn't really come to fruition. And this new film we're working on also is sort of a tragedy about this guy who reached success and then sort of crashed and burned and didn't really, I mean, even like mentally he kind of lost it, just like Salam. It's interesting how that's one of the things when you look back at people's life or the arc or the trajectory of where they started, where they arrived at. It's always begs that way. What does really success mean, right? I mean, what is it? I mean, for Salam, I guess it would have been to be loved by his own people and be. And in the end, we actually, in the film, you do see he was loved. I mean, the amount of people who show up at his funeral is a testament, but he himself probably didn't feel that. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what we expect in the film.
I want to come back to your new film in a bit, but one thing I really liked what you said, and I think it's true for all of us. We're always having something that we want. Not all of our wishes come true all the time, period. Like that's just the way it is.
Right.
There's always something left, right? Even the people who are like, let's just say, for example, Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese, I'm sure they have something missing from their life, or even Oppenheimer. So that's just human nature, and it's sometimes maybe it's a blessing, I find, because we don't know what will happen to us if we get something that we really want.
Wow.
Because you don't know how that would play with our brain and our psyche. I'm just being a devil's advocate, but it's just interesting that I think we all go through it. Dr. Abdus Salam being
it's like the Greek Icarus, like mythology where you I mean, it's good that we don't go too close to the sun, otherwise everybody burn up.
That's great. That's a great way of saying it.
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I find interesting in doing these films about people who, I mean, this is, I don't know. I mean, I never really decided to do biographical films, but it just so happens that I've done like one after the other, these biographical films, some alive, some dead. But yeah, that's basically, it comes down to like what drives these people to do what they do. And, from us looking from the outside in, what lessons do we learn, right? I mean, it's easy to make a hagiography, like Zakir always says, yeah, he was a great man and blah, blah, blah. And, he won, he was an exceptional person. Yeah, applause, applause, applause. But that's not what they are about anyway. I mean, no matter how successful or, you could be the richest man in the world like we're seeing now. I think something else that has to bring them down to the ground, and that's kind of what's interesting to explore.
Yeah. Zakir, and for both of you guys, making a film like this, specifically in, at least some of the elements were done in Pakistan, like especially the cemetery, and I'm sure some interviews and everything. Whether it was during the process or even after, what kind of problems you guys ran into from, if any, from the government, from distributors, or anything like that?
None, surprisingly, none. And I can't explain why. Uh, Nothing untoward has happened. Knock on wood, shouldn't jinx it. Um, I mean, there's always the occasional buffoon who says something stupid. But other than that, it's been very well received. I was careful in not screening it publicly in Pakistan initially.
Oh, so you have been able to screen publicly. That's awesome.
At universities, yes. At universities, screen company in Islamabad, screened at universities in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad. Went down surprisingly well. Uh, you know, one of my favorite places to screen was Lums. They were all laughing, sighing at all the right times, great questions. There's a journalism school in Karachi where it was also very well received. It's kind of surprising. You know, I've been asked this question earlier and here and there also, um, and it still kind of surprises me as to why it was well received. It wasn't Netflix. I mean, obviously it's limited by people who subscribe to Netflix. It's in English, right? The English press in Pakistan can get away with a lot in English if
Mm-hmm.
the Urdu press doesn't have the same freedom. Um, but I mean, you'll find incredible instances of bigotry in well-written English online also. You know,
Yeah.
despite which, I think it went down well. I don't know the
How much?
reason. It's the beauty of the long form format that drives a point home and builds an entire case. Um, there's enough time to emote with characters. Uh, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to know too. I did not expect that, but one,
Yeah.
what you just said could be true, but also I think maybe the younger generation and the education element being in there. But I know people who are educated who don't act like they're educated. But having said all that, in terms of access to his family, and for both of you guys, what was that like? And were there any kind of pushbacks that, no, you guys shouldn't do this? Or did they have, anything like that? Because obviously you're telling their family member story, their father and whatnot.
Access wasn't a problem. It was, easy to look up their emails and we wrote to them. There was a sufficient length of time to build rapport. So we'd show up at their house in London every year, Umar and I, and would scan the photos and scour through Salam's notebooks, his diaries. So we built a great rapport with the family. They weren't entirely thrilled with the film, and there was pushback, but we held our own. We stood our ground. Um, Obviously, the community is a tad conservative, and they observe the parda. So one had to be sensitive around those things. Um, but we stood our ground, and I think by then they understood that we knew more about Salam than anyone else. That factually they couldn't really challenge us. For example, I mean, we knew like intricacies of uh, what all what Salam was working on, the science, the nuclear weapons program, his friendships, his aspirations, in that he sort of desperately wanted the Nobel Prize and lobbied hard to get it. You know, uh, by the end of it, we knew the subject matter really well. Um, and so I think there was a cognizance of, where we're dealing with guys who really know the subject matter. It becomes difficult, right, to then sort of override them. Uh, because you can't use facts, right? The facts we were aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it was tricky because we were getting archives from them, right? So it had, the relationship had to be carefully navigated.
Yeah.
But I think by and large, they were rational.
Right. Um,
And
Anand,
I
sorry, go
think
on.
it's typical. Sorry. I think you would encounter this in any biopic. I think people are too close to their family members and can't see them objectively.
I don't think it's just true for biopics. I even think it's like if you're making, and I went through this too, like whenever you're making a film about a certain community or a certain cause, and for them to sort of see what you're trying to do on the flip side of that is
Mm.
really, really challenging, right? Like for this and for In Search of My Sister, I the protagonist in my film, even to this day when we have screening, we joke around that how she wasn't happy with certain things and she wanted to boycott the film, and I was like, go ahead. And she didn't. But I think that's because you're just so close to it, you can't see those things, and that's understandably so. Um, Anand, in terms of sort of wrapping up on Salam, and we'll go on to your next project. In terms of uh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, one of my favorite scenes, and I would love to know how that sort of came about, or was it just like just it happened by organically when there is they're in his room. I think it was Sun in his room, and they were going through all the stuff,
Mhm.
radio and different
Yeah.
things. How was that, or how did that scene come about? Because that made it very, very personal in many, many ways.
Yeah, no, that scene, I clearly had a vision in my mind how I wanted to do it. When we entered his house, when I saw the room, I clearly had an idea about how I wanna, shoot that whole sequence, with his son being there and kind of demonstrating uh, what a day in the life of Salam would have been like in that house.
Mm,
So, and the fact that that room was just left like it was when he was around, with the glasses there and the books there, and he talks about very specific things about his dad, like PG Woodhouse, and he listened to this LP, and the incense burning and LP and the Quran. I mean, everything was just, it was a no-brainer for me as far as visually how I wanted to come about, building that sequence, that scene. So yeah, we spent a whole day that day in that house, filming. um his son is, like you were talking uh about everybody, I mean, everybody in the family, even with this film, like everybody has this one image of Salam, right? And they want to protect that, and that's when they have issues with how they come through in something like a film, where they feel like, okay, these strangers are coming and taking my
yeah,
dad's story or whoever's story, and now they're gonna make it their own, and that's where the insecurity comes in. But I feel like once they get comfortable with you, and then that's when they open up. And I think
yeah,
he got pretty comfortable with us when we were in the house, but later he had some issues. I don't know if I remember. But the other son, he was pretty forthcoming then, because the older son felt like he was the guardian of everything Salam, right? I mean, he had to make
Mm.
sure that whatever got out of the gate was thoroughly vetted. But then as a result, now they have a blue plaque on the house. I mean, he got a lot of traction as a result of the film as well. So it's always that give and take that goes on.
yeah.
But
And that's sorry, go on.
no, but even with this film, right? I mean, this particular film that we're making right now, it's the same story. We're dealing with a lot of the family members. It's like Rashomon, right? Each family member has their own
Mm.
version of the person, and then you're trying to ascertain like which version is actually real.
True.
But
Yeah,
all versions are real for them. So it's like this. So you show all the versions and let the audience decide which version they want to believe in,
of course.
Mm. Mm.
and that's kind of
Tell
what.
tell me
And then
about
you
this
have to
film. What
also
is it
draw the
about?
line as to how far you want to go with showing one aspect of the person, unless you have enough evidence or enough, opinions to corroborate that this version of this person is actually true.
True.
And that
It's very interesting. My daughter goes to a Montessori and she's extremely well behaved there. By contrast, at home, she's like an unruly monster. And so I was telling the person who's founded the school that she has two distinct personae, or kids have two distinct personae. And she's like, everyone does. And it's so
Everyone does.
true. I mean, all of us, we're multitudes. We're different people to different things. And I think geniuses are far more complex.
Right.
I mean, look at what all Salam was doing, right? He was both a scientist and a scientific administrator, scientific advisor to Pakistan, professor at Imperial College London. I mean, the guy was like, had 3 lives rolled up into one, married, had 2 wives. He certainly leagues ahead of the curve in terms of intellect. There's so many scientists out there vying to win a Nobel Prize, right? So many come so close. Even fewer actually win it. Brilliant mind. He had to have been enormously complex. One of his students said, I don't know who the real Salam was, only that he was a number of disparate personalities rolled up into one. He was an amalgamation of a number of different personalities.
I mean, that's one of the, I mean, that's one.
Speaking to, the family would also have completely different takes on him. And we've encountered such people, right? The family has a singular perception of them, whereas the outside world has a completely different take on them.
Yeah, also memory plays, what you remember and what you conflate and what you make up. Right. Especially if you're remembering somebody who's gone, is an interesting needle to thread as well, because who knows, they're making up certain images of the person, probably may not be true. And some may be true, some maybe you might maybe only partially know, but you're sort of adding other information that you may have heard of. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing with documentary films. I mean, it's a film. At the end of the day, you're editing, you're framing, you're doing all these things, but you're at least trying to create this illusion that what this person is eventually going to watch on their TV screen or in a movie theater is actually will come away feeling authentic about what they saw, right? I mean, that's what you're trying to get at. You're not trying to tell, the most accurate story about this person. You're trying to tell an authentic story, as authentic as possible, without having a narration, without having any other, without the audience feeling manipulated in how they're getting this story of this particular person or this particular moment in time. And that's where it comes down to editing and the craft used to put things together.
Yeah. And to Zakir's point, I think one of the things that you talked about, multiple personalities, for the lack of better, I think we all have that. We're different people to a teacher versus a friend, to a parents, to coworker. And we all try to, I don't know if you've ever seen that, I'm going in a little bit comedy mode here, Seinfeld episode. I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld. There's a scene where George Costanza says that, the worlds are colliding. So
independent George.
Yeah, independent George. You keep your worlds separate. I think we all do that.
We all do that. We all do that.
Tell me about your next project. What it is about, what is it called? How did you guys get started on it?
Yeah, it's another pretty big biographical film about this guy called Adam Osborne, who invented the first sort of commercially viable portable computer. And he was a success story for a couple of years. People thought he would be the next Bill Gates or the next Steve Jobs. And he had a lot riding in his favor, but then fate didn't really respond in the way he thought it would. And he basically crashed and burned and basically became not known to anybody in the world of personal computing. But without his contribution, probably we wouldn't be where we are in terms of how we use these gadgets so ubiquitously these days, right? I mean, he clearly accelerated the personal computer world pretty significantly, and nobody knows of him. I mean,
I didn't.
unless you Google and go searching, he's not a household name, and he should have been. He could have been like a Steve Jobs kind of character, not only making amazing products, but also being this sort of tech guru and tech optimist or tech evangelist or whatever you want to call them. He could have been a big player. And so we are telling his story just like Salam's story, where he began and where he ended and what was his journey and what are the reasons for his collapse and was it and his family and his, we're telling the whole story just like we told Salam, threading both the professional, the personal, the belief systems, faith, all these topics that we touched with Salam, we're touching here as well, interestingly. But again, it's just a story of a guy who, was really good at
Yeah.
what he could, and he just like Salam, I mean, even he had sort of a very unique upbringing. I mean, he didn't grow up in a village, but he did grow up in sort of a village kind of place, like in a little commune back in India,
Sure.
and deep south in the backwards of beyond, and then rose to Silicon Valley, peak, and then you have to watch the movie to find out what happens next.
Of course. Zakir, what drew you to the film? And then also
Good question.
Yeah, go ahead, answer that and we'll go to the next question.
I was really struck by the fact that he grew up in an ashram in India. And I remember me that Steve Jobs was into like spirituality and this Indian feel good kind of mysticism, whatever you may call it. I don't have the right word for it.
Yeah, his life changed after he went to India, he said, Steve Jobs. But go on.
Yeah, but the one thing I was very intrigued by is Osborne grew up in an ashram in India, and there was this footage of him running. And this guru, Ramana Mahashiri, has grabbed onto the back of his shirt. And it was a very interesting image, and it's still sort of etched in my mind. And I interpreted that image as, maybe he had this anchoring, and that kept him from being ruthless like Jobs or Gates. There was something holding him back. I don't know how correct it is now that I know more of the story, but there was just something about that image, this kid wanting to run and the guru grabbing onto the back of his shirt, only to let a photograph be taken. But for some reason, it created a permanent sort of visual memory in my mind. Obviously, we're also become very dear friends, and so anything Anand works on, I'm roped into. But I liked it archivally also, so as a challenge, because there was little to nothing on Osborne, like on cursory examination, there was nothing significant. It took a fair bit of, digging through several haystacks to find several needles. Anand, I don't know if we can talk about this, but we've managed to negotiate outtakes from CBS 60 Minutes, which is a huge deal.
We found so much now. I mean, Zakir did an amazing job finding photographs, which probably nobody else would have found. It's amazing. I mean, this guy was photographed. I mean, we realized, my God, this guy's being photographed so much. We didn't know until we began to dig and find all these sources. And I'm sure there's, as we're almost close, but we still keep finding new stuff every few days. Something new pops up. Hey, have you seen this? Or have you seen this? But again, like that, him talking about that image, I mean, that's kind of the metaphor of the story, basically, what does success mean? I mean, you run around this world and you try to do all these things. And eventually you do have to come down to the ground and really ask that question to yourself, what is it all about? And I think at the core of our film, we're trying to answer that question is, sure, I mean, he could have been the next Elon Musk. I mean, somebody says in the film, he could have been the next Elon Musk, but is that a good thing? Is that like I mean, we celebrate success by, how much money people have in their bank accounts, and how much is their net worth as far as
Yeah.
their stock and this and that. And is that really mean anything? Is kind of the question we
Try to
sort of
answer.
pose in the film. In fact, one of the guys says, like, technology in one level has given us all these amazing gadgets, but has also created these billionaires who are now actually ruling over us, like the oligarchs, right? I mean, so now we have Elon Musk, who's actually making decisions for the nation, and he's not even been elected. I mean, he can actually change change the Congress's, a bill that's going to be passed in Congress gets derailed by a tweet by this guy, and technology has got him where he is. So, like oil back in the day, technology is now creating these barons and oligarchs and bureaucrats. So we kind of pose these questions in a very kind of subtle way in the film.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, hopefully people will resonate to it the way they resonated with Salam. And again, again, it comes down to the human story. Again, I mean, it's an amazing human story. It has, like the Greek tragedy, it has, pathos, catharsis. What are the four stages? It has all those four stages.
The other, you asked me what attracted me. Sorry, didn't mean to cut anyone off. What's interesting is he's known better by MBA students than by computer scientists, and that's because he made a marketing faux pas. He kind of shot himself in the foot, and it's come to be called the Osborne effect. So ironically, he's
and people read about it without really knowing who or what it's about.
Superficially. But it's sad that this absolute genius has gone down in history more has gone down more as a symbol for a marketing folly than being a pioneering genius. He also began to dabble in AI.
Yeah, this is one thing we just found out.
When his company went bust, and was working on neural networks. So it's interesting how he went from the sort of the zenith of technology, let's make a portable computer, to another, what would become the zenith of technology. Just always cutting edge, always top notch, top shelf.
Yeah. It's funny. The whole thing with success is, right, like some people who don't get successful, they save themselves from all the bringing down that comes on later on, because once you become to a certain point, then it's like, it's just like it's a story, right? You go up, and then what goes up must come down, and then you go up. So maybe I find it interesting that, Anand, you said that how Salam and this story, Osborne, are very similar, that how people who have not been successful, what they could have done, what they have done. So just to bring into light, what is the deeper attraction for you to those two similar stories? Is there any, I mean, we all do make who we are, and what, so it turns a switch on for ourselves. Is there a specific part in your life that you feel that sort of connects you to those two stories, or?
I always find this dialectic, or whatever you want to call it, between faith, religion, spirituality, and all these things, and material success. And I mean, if you notice, I don't know, in the last 20 years, I mean, now I'm like 55, I've entered this zone where a lot of people my age are like all like feel like they've reached their peak, and they've done, made all the money that they want, and now they're all like chasing some guru, or becoming spiritual, or suddenly finding religion, or going on pilgrimages, and some have even retired and are like just hopping around temples or whatever, and this always fascinates me. So in both these stories, I mean, of course, Salam, I mean, there's that which we talked about in our film, is like, you are a particle physicist. You're basically trying to understand the universe from a whole different angle. And then you're also a committed, believe in
Devout believer.
faith and all that. And so with this story, I mean, he grows up in a sort of spiritual setting, kind of rejects it, and then chases money, fame, success, whatever you want to call it. And then he has no choice but to come back to where he started, not by his own design, but sort of by default. I mean, he has no other.
I was trying to not give it away, but
yeah. I don't want to. I mean, I'm not giving the whole thing away.
Yeah, you're not giving.
I mean, he does go through that full circle. So yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, in any story, I mean, you want the full arc, you want a full circle. Any story you want to write or read or appreciate somebody's life. I mean, that full circle always makes it that much more interesting, right? I mean, I don't know if I'm consciously exploring that, but when I'm start working on something, I really am looking at, what is this story really about? Like we always say, like, what's the log line in a movie, right? I mean, if you can define it in one sentence, then you got a good movie or a good film.
Now that you've set full circle, the image that we talked about acquires more meaning. The image of the guru holding on the back of his shirt, right? It's kind of interesting how that's also symbolic of him coming back something pulling him back to his base. That's a lovely image, by the way.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this film, man. When are you guys hoping to?
Yeah, I think we're very close now. It's a question of fine tuning. We have to take out some time and get it to a. So we're going to have 2 cuts. It's going to be on PBS nationwide. So we'll have to have 1 cut for that and 1 for the festivals, which will be slightly longer. But I think we have packed in all the elements that we were hoping to into the film. Now it's just a matter of getting all the stuff we need to make it, this sort of heavy film that it is. Heavy in the sense, not emotionally heavy, but it has a lot of stuff packed into it in terms of
dense, you mean?
Yeah, storytelling, in terms of we have some amazing archives and interviews and
amazing.
So yeah. So
when is it coming on PBS? Have they figured out a date?
We don't have an air date, but hopefully like March, if we can pull it off. I think it's come down to like every film, getting the money, getting the resources to complete it.
Yeah.
But as far as
looking for completion funding.
Yeah, completion funding.
If there's any rich people listening to your podcast.
As far as editing goes, I think it's almost there. I mean, our producers at ITVS who funded the film love what they're seeing, and I think this story will be again appreciated, and people will know about this person and appreciate what he contributed to the trajectory of computing and personal computing, and also life in general. Yeah.
What Jawad, I find so thing that sorry, I keep cutting people off. Another thing that really did it for me is that Rosa Parks had a precursor of sorts who we never hear about, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is cumulative. A lot of changes that we see happen before us, erupt before us, have had slow progress in the background, right? The world tends to remember that one person who finally pushes the wall down, but we tend to forget the people who've kept sort of pushing at it. And that's something that really struck me. Eventually, the laptop is something all of us use, right? But the person to have really made it commercially viable, history is forgotten in the course of its trajectory. Anand, what was the name of the woman who did something very similar to Rosa Parks?
Yeah. It's a very famous name too.
Colette.
Claude Colette or Claudine Colette.
Yeah. Interesting. Very few people have heard of her. Everyone's heard of Rosa Parks, right? And so there was another reason why we felt, or why I felt that this story had to be told. We live under this illusion that, Salam's work, for example, was a culmination of a lot of these incredible long chain of contributions to quantum mechanics.
Claudette Colvin was her name. Claudette Colvin.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Isn't that interesting? That too excited my mind. Yet another thing that excited my mind, sorry, I'm cutting you off again, was that Anand gets pitched these great ideas while he's on, or, people tell him with really cool ideas. Never happens to me. I've sat only next to losers on planes.
Yeah, I
Reminds
mean,
me
there is a
of Fight
connection
Club,
to
right?
Salam with this one too. This person who came to me with this idea was actually saw Salam on Netflix, and
Right.
he thought that I might be a good person to tell this story, partly because I'm also Indian. And he kind of wrote me an email saying, hey, have you heard of so and so? I said, no. I think you'd be good in making a film about it. I said, I normally don't solicit stories like this, but if you have like a one pager, you can write me a one pager and I'll look at it. So he sent me this one pager and it looked sort of interesting. It was telling a story of this father and son, India, growing up in the commune and all that. And then I met the guy and he had sort of written a manuscript of a book he wanted to publish between the father and son story, kind of, which was not sort of the way this film could have been made. So yeah, so that's how the story sort of came to me.
Interesting.
Because I made Salam in the sense that
I totally agree with I love what you guys are doing, and kind of what Zakir said. Nowadays, a lot of streaming platforms and production companies, all they're attracted to is true crime and biopics of famous people because there's already an audience there, right? Even with true crime. But it kind of connects to what you're saying, like there's always people behind, who push the wall. Like there's people look at John Williams, who I absolutely love his work, but majority, if not close to all of his themes from Star Wars and Superman come from a great musician in the 1800s, Gustav Holst. Not many people know about him. Like if you listen to his album called The Planets, you'll literally hear the Death Star's theme in there. So it's completely true that how there's so many people who we don't know, and I'm glad that you guys are doing these because not many people know about. I only knew about Dr. Abdus Salam because I share the same birthday, plus comes from the community, and
Yeah.
that's the only reason. Otherwise, I wouldn't have either. So it's awesome what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are a whole bunch of stories like these which are remaining to be told.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys change that trend of super popular people biopics, which are great. You should watch. We should make them, but also people who have been forgotten, the forgotten heroes, right? So,
But it's quadruply difficult to star because who'd want to empower you to tell those stories? And they're phenomenally important because just driving home the point that knowledge is cumulative, right? It takes many people to enact a major seismic shift
100%.
in any given thing. But there's very little by way of, I mean, if they've sort of disappeared away in history, there's little interest, right? Because people force what's known already as opposed to unearth these buried treasures and teach, or I don't want to say teach, but enlighten people vis-a-vis something they haven't heard of before. Unless, of course, they're con artists or serial killers or
But part of it is also, right, like what happened with Dr. Abdus Salam and the history in Pakistan being erased about him. Not I truly have see that now happening all over the world, even North America to a certain extent. Like, in a very finesse way where you're slowly eliminating certain elements in the history, and then when it's not there, then it never happened. And that's a shame because history teaches us everything, about who we are, where we came from, and I hope things change, but it's again like you have to make these stories because, and I'm really excited about the Osborne film that you're doing, and I'm not even gonna read anything on it because I'll just wait for the film to watch it from scratch and kind of get into it that way.
Yeah, no, in one of these films that I worked on, again, it was called 300 Miles to Freedom. And it was again about a slave who escaped a plantation in Virginia and came to New York in search of freedom back in the 1800s. Again, nobody heard of him. Everybody knows about Harriet Tubman, but
Yeah.
John W. Jones is his name. If you Google him, you'll find enough information. He saved up to like 800 slaves to freedom, right? And I mean, unless you grew up in this one little part of America, you wouldn't know his story. And what a story that was. And in that, one of the historians says, like, it's from the past that we make our present, and from the present we shall make our future. And I think that's history. I mean, if you really don't understand your past, you can't make your present.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what I guess this profession that I'm in, or we are in, is
Right.
documentary or history capturing, whatever you can call it, is that's what we're trying to do. Is that's why I always say, like, you have to make a film which can speak to the times you are in, even though if it's of the past. Otherwise, it becomes difficult to make it entertaining at the same time engrossing enough for people to.
You got to make something timeless, right? So, and that's all it is. And just to sort of wrap it up, guys, besides this Osborne documentary, if both of you can separately talk about what's other one project that is sort of in the stage or in the middle stage that you are able to talk about, if you're willing to.
Interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I have a short film that I want to make. This is not a documentary. This is if I can pull it off this year. I've been working on it for a very, very long time. And if I can pull it off this next year, it'll be like my first time working with actors and things like that. But I hope that comes to pass. I don't know. We'll see. But again, Zakir and I I mean, Zakir is involved in a couple of other projects, but we both are also pursuing an idea about the bubble boy. I don't know if you know. I mean, you were talking about Seinfeld a while back.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the bubble boy from Seinfeld.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you know of the real bubble boy, it happened in the 70s.
Yeah.
80s. It's a fascinating story, and we found some interesting information that nobody knows about. And we are hoping it can be something. It's very early. We're still doing. I mean, Zakir has already pulled 2 hours of archival footage on this, but
more, almost 100.
But we are trying to find an angle that somebody will throw money at us to go at it. So, but
it's always about money, man. Throw money at us and watch us do crazy shit. I'm involved in. I'm making a documentary on Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, so we're producing it again. Fundraising. I think that seems to. We're always fundraising, aren't we, Jawad? Jawad and I compare a lot of fundraising notes. This idea, which Anand just mentioned, was pitched to him on an airplane. I always recall the scene from White Club where he's like, "You're the most interesting single-serving friend I've had." Like, I've never had the pleasure of sitting with an interesting person on a plane. Never. My friend sat next to Susan Sarandon, and other friends sat next to God knows who. Anand sits next to people who pitch him great ideas. I've only sat next to morons. Breath and body.
Well, it's also could be that maybe Anand is making an effort to have a conversation and you're not.
I wonder what's up. I mean, I've I've gone bald. I'm wearing glasses. I'm trying to emulate.
Because I find that on the plane you have to be very careful, because if you start talking to someone randomly, they might think you're creepy, right? Because you're just. But sometimes there's an organic thing that happens, and it's happened with me a few times, but nothing to an idea of.
You've got to cross the threshold of non-verbal communication to say the first word. You've got to sort of cross.
That's true.
I mean, in this,
they'll help you break the ice.
Yeah, in this case, he approached me saying, "Are you a professor?" I don't know. Maybe I look like a professor. But I'm a filmmaker. So I said, "Oh," and then he started talking about this book that he wrote, and I said, "Wow, that's interesting." But anyway, yeah, no, it is
awesome. Well, this is interesting. This is really good. Well, guys, thank you so much. Unless you want to add something. Oh, I do have one more point before I wrap it up. There was a scene in the film which is interesting because the film came out which year? Salam, 2000 2019 or 20?
2019, it had a Netflix release in 2019.
Okay. So obviously you guys started working 2016, as you said. There's a photo of Dr. Abdus Salam and Oppenheimer, right?
Yeah.
And now we have a film by Christopher Nolan last year in Oppenheimer. Was there anything more to that? And I wonder if you guys were making it around the same time when Oppenheimer was being made, would you have done something different, bringing that a little bit more into it? Or was that the only thing that you guys had in the film from the
I
beginning?
think if I remember, we have two pictures, right? One.
We've used both. We've used both.
Yeah,
The
there's
one
two.
is when Oppenheimer is in a formation of ICTP.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
International Center for Theoretical Physics
Yeah.
meeting. But that was the only photo we had of Salam and Oppenheimer. And Tariq Ali mentions that Salam was the only person who was plugged in to the international circuit of theoretical physicists, cutting edge theoretical physicist. He knew Oppenheimer. I mean, he's speaking about Salam's connections vis-a-vis trying to amass knowledge and intel about how to go about making a bomb. But there was no one else really. No
Yeah.
one else of that stature, no one else who was rubbing shoulders with the likes of Oppenheimer.
I would love to know, and I'm sure there's a way to find out now that we're talking about it, if in the actual Christopher Nolan Oppenheimer movie there was ever in a script stage mention of Dr. Abdus Salam. That would be really cool to know. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I know. I mean, having watched the film twice, I watched it twice, one with a Q&A with Nolan. I mean, it's completely based off of that book. So
Yeah.
if it's not in the book, it wouldn't be in the movie.
Yeah.
It's so close to the book, and I personally found the film to be extremely dense. I mean, it's beautifully made and everything, but I just thought it was so dense that somehow it kind of left out sort of some of the. I mean, you do get a sense of his humanity a little bit, but the focus was so much on because the book itself is so dense. It's like what, 800 or 900 pages. I tried to read it. I read it like half and like, I gave up on it.
I'm so glad that I know somebody else who thinks like that, because I saw Oppenheimer on IMAX, and first thing that ticked me off was because it kept switching between IMAX and then regular 35 millimeter, but it didn't. I don't know why people went crazy over it, because it didn't hit me in the same way that, let's say, Inception did or Interstellar did.
Yeah.
There was no emotional connection for me, at least for me.
No, me too. I mean, and second time I watched it, I realized it was like wall-to-wall music. If you notice, there's no
that's what bothered me the most. That's what bothered me
the only time the only sequence which I truly loved was when the bomb goes up. There's silence in the film for the first time. Yes. And you don't hear the bomb, but you just see the bomb go off, and that whole sequence is well done, beautifully done. But the rest was so back and forth. I don't know. Anyway,
I agree.
That's like the scene. There's a scene in Fast and the Furious when they're walking because they've just wrecked their car.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's a different topic for a different day. But listen, guys, thank you so much. I've been meaning to do this for a while. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I'm glad we did it. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you so much for the time, and thank you for making.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.
You too. Happy holidays. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.